Welcome back to the channel. Just giving you guys a market update just because I have not been live for about a week. I do want to be doing regular videos, less live streams, just because I want to grow my channel. So, starting with it today, we had the inflation numbers come out. Pretty neutral. I don't think it was negative or positive. We had core inflation coming higher than expected. However, inflation year over year came in as predicted or slightly lower than there was predicted. So, but it was, the same as it was previous month. So 2.7, the previous was 2.7, consensus was 2.8. Core inflation came in as 3.1. The previous was 2.9. However, consensus was 3%. So very neutral data. And when something's neutral and not negative, the market is likely to rally. And I do think August will be a bullish month. And I think September will most likely will get some sort of pullback because a lot of people are in the camp of if we rally in August and the rate cuts are coming in September, it means we're most likely going to rally even more. But what I genuinely think will happen is we'll probably get a decent pullback in September. And the reason is because the Fed is cutting rates because there's a problem in the system. Unemployment is looking weak again. People are scared of a recession now, and I think that's why the Fed is cutting rates. And every time, think of it as like buy the news, sell the event type of thing. So if everyone's expecting a rate cut in September, and I think when the rate cut actually happens, you're most likely going to get some sort of sell the news event. So that's what my prediction is. I think the next couple of weeks, the market will be very bullish, pullback into September, and then I think we'll get the final blow off top in the end of the year. So that's what my prediction is. That's basically where I'm at the moment. And I think one of the reasons that could, especially if you hold altcoins as well, one of the most important charts I think everyone should keep an eye out is the Bitcoin dominance chart. I think, this is the long-term trend line that we need to break, which is at basically just below 60%. So we need to get below 60%, have a daily close below 60%, maybe even retest this trend line and then continue lower. That will more or less guarantee your alt season. You guys can see right now dominance is going back down, retested, got rejected, and now is trying to break through again. So if this breaks through, it's going to be very, very bullish. And I think one of the main reasons it will break through is because of how bullish Ethereum is over the next couple of weeks. So you guys can see Ethereum on the back of the CPI numbers did have a decent rally. And I think over the next couple of weeks, I think Ethereum will attempt to break his all-time high. I think it possibly will break his all-time high, have the retest in September or slightly below, maybe give a fake out below, and then have his final pump. How high? I don't really know. Maybe 6K, maybe 7K, maybe 8K. No one really knows. We'll have to see. Bitcoin as well. Bitcoin, the last time I was live, I said, watch this trend line. If Bitcoin breaks above this trend line and holds above, then very, very likely we're going to be bullish. Now, we do have a CME gap that needs to be filled around the 118 to 117 region. Could that be filled on Thursday? It's possible. It hasn't been filled at the moment. Thursday, we have the PPI numbers coming out, and that's going to, I think that will give a clear indication to the markets on which way it wants to go. So that's the next data point that we need to look out for, and I will make a video after PPI as well, just to update you guys. PPI comes out on Thursday. That's gonna. I think that's important, just as important as inflation numbers as well, because that's the metric the Fed normally uses, on if they want to cut rates or not. So another good thing or another important data that we need to look out for is the overnight reverse repo. This is slowly draining back down to zero. And oftentimes, there's a few reasons why it will go to zero. One of them is, banks are not lending money, and they're putting the money out elsewhere. They're not lending money to the Fed. They're using the money to either borrow money, put the money elsewhere to better use. Well, it could be short-term treasuries, it could be the stock market, it could be Bitcoin, whatever it is, right? If this goes to zero, oftentimes, the last time it went to zero in 2019, we had a massive spike in borrowing costs. I don't think that's going to happen again. But when this goes to zero and the banks are in massive losses from holding treasuries and bonds, you could get an end to QT. And the reason is because you don't want to put too much pressure on the banks, just because, like I said, if the banks are in huge losses and the repos go into zero, oftentimes it makes the system a little bit more tighter and puts a little bit more pressure on the banks and the system as well. So one of the ways to actually resolve this is by ending QT. So I do think in 2025, the Fed will at least pause QT for a little while. They can always restart it again. And obviously, that could be the reason we're going to the next bear market, or it could be some sort of bond market crisis. Because guess what happened the last time the Fed cut interest rates? If you look at the 10-year bond market, the last time the Fed actually cut interest rates was in last year, 2024, in September, similar time to what we're going to get this time. Look what happened to the 10-year. It exploded up to almost 5%. So, and everything went expensive. Borrowing costs went up, mortgages went up. And I think if the Fed decides to cut rates again, I do think this will most likely rally again one more time. Because a lot of people think if they cut interest rates, that the mortgage rates and all these other stuff are going to become more cheaper. But the reality is that's not how you fix the mortgage rates or people getting mortgages. You have to build more houses, etc. But cutting rates is not going to do it. So I think if they cut rates next month, I think the 10-year will most likely rally, and that's why I don't really believe in the consensus that 2026 is going to be extremely bullish. I don't think that's the case. I think the system is very, very fragile right now. I think if one thing breaks, I think the whole thing will come down. And the fact that the repo is almost zero, the TGA account is back down again just because they started to use that money before they decided to increase the deficit again. But this is very, very important for altcoins, because when this gets refilled, it sucks liquidity out of the markets. But one thing that came out very positive recently was Besson did say, he made it very clear that they're not going to refill this rapidly. They're going to do it very, very slowly, so it affects the market less. And what this does, it gives us more time for the markets to actually pump, because every time they refill this, the market tanks because you're taking money out of the system. So if they refill this back up to like 800 million, that's a bunch of money getting sucked out of the system. Millions and millions getting sucked out of the system, which is not very good for altcoins because they rely on liquidity. The more liquidity they add, you guys can see they started to use this money, they injected this back into the system. Everything rallied in April to now. And then, when they refill this aggressively, the liquidity gets sucked out. And because Besson said they're not going to do that, it gives us a few more months to pump. So that's very, very bullish in my opinion. I think in terms of the macros, that's pretty much it. I would keep an eye out on Thursday's data, PPI. If that comes in net neutral or comes in slightly positive, the market is likely to rally on the back of that data. It is, a business cycle, so the data is very, very important. However, the market is expecting a rate cut anyways. And I think a rate cut in September is more or less solidified. So, overall, my consensus is I am bullish for the rest of the year. Obviously, in every single bull run, you are going to get little pullbacks. I think August, we're going to pump. September, we'll have a little pullback. And then towards the end of the year, I think the rally will continue. So, that's my consensus. Drop a like on your way out. Hit the subscribe button if you are new. And I will be making regular videos. I'll be doing some tier lists as well, because there's a few different sectors starting to wake up now. So gaming is starting to outperform AI. I showed the chart on my Twitter account. So go follow my Twitter. All the links are in the description. I showed the chart where RWA is currently outperforming everything. DeFi is up there, but AI is the worst performing asset behind. I think it was something else. I can't remember what it was, but gaming has been outperforming AI. So, could we get a gaming run? It's possible. The trend has increased significantly. So I'll be making, different tier lists, updated the tier list, because, tier list changes all the time. The market goes in different directions. We could go down significantly. The X's might increase. So I'll be doing that over the next couple of weeks. I will still be doing lives, maybe once or twice, every couple of weeks. I don't think I'm going to be doing them regularly as I used to, but I will be doing regular videos. So anyways, drop a like on your way out, guys. Subscribe. I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye-bye.